is that they're terrified of us confronting them back.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize this. You know, some people, yes, have confronted you about the podcast, but a lot of people just mutter about it behind the scenes and don't come out and say, you know, I really object to this, or I don't like this, or you shouldn't say this. And that it's very rare for that to happen. Instead, behind the scenes, you know, we hear people saying, oh, they're complaining about it, but people don't have, if you'll pardon the expression, the balls to come up to you in person and say, I think that's lame.
Right, and I actually have more respect for people who do come up or send an email and say they dislike it. And I've had people email, and I read them on the air. It doesn't bother me at all.
Right, but part of the problem is that confrontations, again, don't always mean reconciliation. They just mean more information is being shared.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that, you know, we have to look at. That just because you confront somebody about a problem doesn't mean the problem's going to get resolved. My argument, and I think Crowley's argument would be too, that there's a better chance of a positive resolution or a resolution of some kind happening with a confrontation than without it. But again, we go back to the Kowalczyk study, which is so hilarious and so unfortunate on a certain level because it was from so long ago. You know, in the early 90s is when she did that study. Very little has changed.
Yeah, 15
the community
years
still
has
doesn't,
passed.
Right, the community still doesn't really want to confront problems directly. And the result of that is that things don't improve because nobody really knows when they've screwed up.
Well, the other thing is there are no goals. So the only thing that people could be confronting each other on is behavior and things like that, whereas a more healthy environment would have goals and projects that people would be working towards, and you'd be able to judge whether or not that was successful, and you would be able to look at milestones, and you could discuss that and confront people when they're not living up to those expectations.
Right, but everyone would be on the same page. You would know what your job was. You would know what your job responsibilities were. You would know what people were accountable for, so that if you were confronted, you could respond reasonably, as well as being in the situation where you could say, hey, look, you know, this person really needs to do this. And when you say confront people about behavior, what's interesting is that without goals and without a shared plan, the de facto kind of conduct rules are, you know, normative middle-class reality. The people that don't behave like normal middle-class people are the ones who violate those standards and tend to be the ones who get confronted. And the problem is that, of course, and this is like a big issue in the OTO, is that we run around telling everyone, do it thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And then when somebody misbehaves and acts like a maniac, everyone's sort of hesitant to criticize them because they've just been telling that person over and over again, and the entire time they've known them, do it thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And if the person in question turns around and says, well, it was my will to run around with a banana on my head, drunk out of my mind with my pants around my ankles, then it's difficult for that person to have a response.
Right. Well, the other thing is if they don't confront people, all kinds of people go advancing in various directions, and then they blow up. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, how did this person get there? Why didn't we see this coming?
Right. Well, we've looked at this recently, too, in that confrontations also involve judgment, they involve making a decision, and they also involve a certain amount of knowledge. And I've seen people saying over and over again when some crazy maniac blows up in the community, in the larger Thelema community as well as in the OTO, the consistent comment is, well, we didn't see this coming. We didn't know. You know, you and I will ask, why did this person get promoted into a position of serious responsibility when they turn out to be maniacs who do terrible things? And the response always is, well, we didn't know that about him. We didn't know that about her. We thought she was fine. We thought he was fine. We didn't know. And when you start to examine it, you realize they don't know because they purposely avoided inquiring. They didn't want to look too closely because if they looked too closely, they'd have to judge that person. And if Thelema is about not judging people, then it's better not to know because it makes it easier not to judge. And if you don't know, then you can't confront because you don't know what's going on. And you can detect within this a pattern of withdrawal from the community, which is ironic given the fact that everyone's pushing this concept of fraternity on everyone. How can you be fraternal with people you don't know?
Right.
And if you're promoting maniacs into positions of authority and importance where they can make decisions, and you turn around and say, well, I didn't know this person well enough, then you have to ask, well, what kind of fraternity is it when you don't know them well enough to know that they're a nut or not?
Right.
And we're not talking, you and I are not talking about a few isolated examples, are we?
No, I've seen this stuff happening since I've been in the Thelemic community and from the beginning of the 90s.
Right, over and over and over again. It's a consistent pattern. And what's appalling to me is this constant refrain, we didn't know. And they go after, how didn't you know? There's never that question, why didn't you know? Why did you withdraw your mind away from that situation? Now, a friend of mine today started laughing because I wrote a piece about this in which I said, gnosis is about knowledge. And if you don't know that someone's a nut or not, your gnosis is impaired. He thought this was funny. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but Gnosticism is about knowledge. And if people think ignorance is bliss, or that not knowing people that well is going to protect, your non-judgment morality, then you can't be a Gnostic.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it, and I appreciate you being on the podcast again.
Thanks
Talk
for
to you
having
soon.
me, John. Okay, 93.
93.
Thanks to Keith for being on the show. I think these ongoing discussions about aspects within the Thelemic community are very useful. And as far as I can tell from the feedback I'm getting, people really appreciate the various topics that Keith brings up. So keep that feedback coming and let us know how we're doing. I certainly do forward those feedbacks to Keith when they reference him. The last interview is with author Steven Ashe. Steven is the author of the Qabalah of the 50 Gates and also the head of the organization FSR, or Fraternitas Sanctum Regnum, or Fraternity of the Sacred King. He has a number of books out. The first one, as I mentioned, is the Qabalah of the 50 Gates. That was first put out by Mandrake Press in the UK a number of years ago. There is a new edition coming out that Steven is publishing through Lulu Press with a new introduction. He's also has some books out called The Keys to the Rosicrucian Qabalah, the Qabalah, the Necrosis Codex, and the Qabalah, the Testament of Solomon. All of these are very interesting books about various aspects of Qabalah, using them in the magic. The one that is the Qabalah, the Necrosis Codex, is the teachings of the first grade within his organization. All of these can be looked up off his website and purchased through that. He also has a number of CDs. We talk about those in the program. So he's got some very interesting ideas about Qabalah and using Qabalah to create a personal mythology. And I thought that was very interesting, too. So here's an interview with Steven Ashe. And this interview was done over Skype, so the sound quality is a little different. I had to kind of splice the two channels together in a linear format. So normally we'd be talking together, and I think it sounds okay, but it may be a little disjointed. So I hope you all can bear with that. It's a very interesting interview, though. So here's Steven Ashe. We have on the podcast Steven Ashe. Are you there, Steven?
Hello, yes, John.
Welcome to the podcast, 93.
93, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those who don't know, you're the author of the Qabalah of the 50 Gates, published by Mandrake Press in the UK, and also a practitioner for the last 20 years within magic and the Qabalah. Before we get into your Qabalah and your book and everything, let's do a bit of your history. When did you join an order or get involved in an occult group in your life?
Well, I believe it all started stemming from my interest in the tarot in the mid-70s when I was in my teenage years, coming across various packs such as the Marseille deck and books on the tarot soon led to the Rider-Waite deck and also onto the Thoth deck. And it was impossible after a certain point, after consulting so many various works upon the tarot, not to come across the works of Aleister Crowley and the teachings of the Hermetic Golden Dawn. And so by the time I was 18 and I left home and established myself with some degree of independence from my parents and from the youth time of my life, as it were, I was already on the lookout for a magical order or someone who fitted into a chain of transmission that could perhaps pass on some teachings in a human way that would make sense to someone beginning the path. And I'd read in Francis King's Ritual Magic in England, which I believe is reprinted in the States as Ritual Magic. You may be able to correct me on that one. There was a chapter on the Order of the Cubic Stone, and I remember going to various sources, public libraries, knocking on doors of local publications such as glossy magazines on the paranormal, which were being published from my hometown of Wolverhampton, and asking questions as to where I might find such people, and such people as the Order of the Cubic Stone, who were mentioned in Francis King's book. As it turned out, I'd asked so many questions. I'd already started to publish a number of underground periodicals on the old Xerox format of the 70s, a sort of post-Principia Discordia. And let me see, I remember one of these must have got into the hands of a local editor of one such esoteric periodical that was on the market at the time. And he turned up on my door, because I'd left my address after sending it in to him, with the head of the Order of the Cubic Stone, Robert Turner, who features in Francis King's work. And it was a meeting, they say when the pupil is ready, the master arrives. It very much felt like that, and I think this is one of those meaningful synchronicities that occur within the life of anyone who's opened themselves and cultivated the capacity to seek the knowledge with open eyes and open ears. This is a mark of that seems to show itself in the lives of people like the young Crowley, happening upon Julian Baker and being led to George Cecil Jones, and through him the Order of the Golden Dawn. Little synchronicities like that can have amazing effects upon one's life, and it is a question of choosing one's moment to act, which is where the will is brought into the issue, and we are adherents of free will, Thelema. And I think I chose my moments very well back there in 1979, when I more or less begged Robert Turner to accept me into the Order of the Cubic Stone as a pupil, and spent the next 2 years pursuing the probationer and Nokoris grades of the order, which more or less gave the full teachings of the Golden Dawn between Neophyte and Adeptus Minor. So I was very fortunate in that, being such a young man, with such an open heart towards the path of Western Hermeticism, that the forces of destiny smiled favourably upon me, really. I'm very grateful for those opportunities. So I was actually involved on a level of preparatory Kabbalistic work, the work of preparing the self, during my period within the Order of the Cubic Stone, which was an honour to be in at the time of my membership.
And where did you go to after that?
Like many orders which are living and breathing creatures, which awaken and sleep, any esoteric order goes through cycles of expansion and decline, cycles of vitality, and then choking bureaucracy. And I think that if you are a member of any organisation, be it the OTO, the AA, the OCS, the Order of the Cubic Stone, the Fraternity of the Sanctum Regnum, the order which I moved on to from the Cubic Stone, if one sticks around for long enough within the membership of these groups, you will see these cycles repeat themselves. And so the optimum period of membership for any individual within an official organised movement within the esoteric world is possibly limited by the fact that these cycles occur naturally, so that initiates are trained and move on to form their own groups, whilst new initiates are take up the slack, as it were. So I moved on with 3 or 4 other members of the, 2 other members of the Order of the Cubic Stone, Diane Edwards and Frances Taylor, and formed the Fraternity of the Sanctum Regnum with a 4th member, John Edisbury, and that was in 1981, basically employing the, as then, unpublished works of the Golden Dawn tradition. I think many of these papers ended up in Regardi's, or is it the now the New Falcon version of the Golden Dawn? So, but back then we had access through our contacts within the Cubic Stone and the people we met we're fortunate enough really to be able to grasp those teachings, possibly only a few years before they became public property, but certainly at a time that made a key difference to a young order trying to flourish and make its name. We weren't the only splinter group from the Order of the Cubic Stone. There was also a quite successful group practicing in the north of England called the Order